Hello everyone, welcome to Malta 5. I'm JD, and as usual, I'm here playing the jankiest Tier 3 Spicy Rogue Brews, all for your viewing pleasure. First things first, if you enjoy what we do here, please take a moment to like and subscribe. It's a quick and easy way, it really helps out the channel, quick and easy way to show your support. We'd appreciate it. Also, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Main Phase Media. These videos would not be possible without them, so please check them out for all your graphic design and video production needs. And finally, if you have your own janky masterpiece you'd like to see me play, you can always leave a comment or shoot an email to the address in the description below. And with that, we'll get straight into the deck tech. And today is a deck I'm calling LD and Taxes. The LD, of course, standing for Land Destruction. Because what's more fun than blowing up your opponent's lands? So this deck takes some elements from the Death and Taxes, hence the name, the Death and Taxes builds, or Hate Bears, whatever you want to call it, with a heavy focus of taxing their resources and straining their resources and capitalizing on that, specifically their mana. I guess we'll start with the land destruction itself. We've got Stone Rain, classic, 3 converted mana cost sorcery, destroy target land. Boom, simple as that. Then its cousin, Molten Rain, similar. It's also 3 converted mana cost, but this requires double red. And same thing, destroy target land. However, if that land was non-basic, it deals 2 damage to that land's controller. So this just seems like a strictly better version, you would think. However, the double red can be constrictive. Sometimes we don't have double red when we want to cast this. And the 2 damage in our deck isn't quite worth the risk of not being able to cast this. We're not a burn deck. We're not trying to race the opponent and get them dead as fast as possible. Yes, the 2 damage is a nice bonus, but if you can't cast the spell at all, at least at the time, when it's most effective, it's obviously far worse. So I decided to go 4 Stone Rain and only 2 Molten Rain, because ideally we want to be casting these ASAP. And to help with that, we have our friend Simian Spirit Guide, whom you can exile from hand to add a red to your mana pool. So we could potentially be casting a Molten Rain as early as, turn 2. On the draw, technically as early as turn 1 with the Gemstone Caverns. But oftentimes we can get this off on turn 2. But if our only land is a white source, or 2 white sources, and Simian Spirit Guide is our only source of red, then we can't cast Molten Rain, but we can cast Stone Rain. So, again, that's the reasoning for more Stone Rain than Molten. Our other land destruction card is Boom Bust. I don't think we will rarely ever get to the bust half of the card. And even if we do, I don't know that we would want to cast it necessarily. Maybe situationally, but the important part of this card is Boom. Destroy target land you control and target land you don't control. So it's a symmetrical effect for a red and a colorless. This we can cast on turn 1 with the help of Simian Spirit Guide or Gemstone Caverns. This is pretty easy to get off turn 1. There's a couple cool, tricky synergies with this card. So, like I said, it's symmetrical, but we can kind of offset that symmetry. So the lands we want to be targeting are our fetch lands and our flagstones. Now, the way it works, well, with flagstones, it's a legendary land. However, when it's put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you can search your library for a Plains card and just put it onto the battlefield. It replaces itself. So if we target that with Boom, our land doesn't actually get destroyed per se. I mean, it does, but it replaces itself with another plane. So we target our flagstones, we just go fetch out a Sacred Foundry or one of basic planes. So flagstones is a great one to hit with Boom. The other good one, like I said, was the Arid Mesa, our fetch land. What you do is you cast Boom. This would have to be, in order to do this effectively, you either need a Simian Spirit Guide or 3 lands out. But you cast Boom, you target your Arid Mesa, hold priority, maintain priority, and in response to Boom on the stack, you crack your fetch land, go find whatever you want, and then when it resolves, the Arid Mesa that you had originally targeted with Boom is no longer there. It's no longer a legal target, so it does nothing on our side. And the opponent's land still gets destroyed, but it fizzles on our side. So it becomes a one-sided land destruction for just 2 mana. So that's kind of the cool combos with Boom. Even casting it fairly sometimes can really hurt an opponent. If we've got lands to spare, we're at 3 or 4 lands, losing one of our lands sometimes isn't a big deal if we're destroying Tron land, or we're cutting them off of a color that they need, etc. So even casting this fairly, so to speak, can still be great. But anyway, so that's the actual land destruction. Now, to complement this, we have a couple cards. The first being my absolute favorite in the deck, which is a card called Mana Tithe. This is a card you don't see very often. It is a white counterspell. Counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. Any spell, non-conditional. Controller has to pay 1, though. The idea being, in our deck, we are keeping them so constrained on their mana, blowing up their lands, that they can't afford to pay the 1. And so we just have a hard counter for 1 white, which no one ever sees coming. No one expects Mana Tithe. My favorite is basic Plains Go. The opponent tries to cast like a Noble Hierarch or something, and you Mana Tithe it. Turn 1. The salt is real. No one expects it. Counterspell turn 1 from a basic Plains. So Mana Tithe is pretty hilarious and works well with our overall game plan. Let's see. Another good one is Thalia, Guardian of Thraben. Non-creature spells cost 1 more to cast, so again, we're taxing them. For their non-creature spells, they're having to pay extra for them, in addition to hopefully having their lands destroyed, so it kind of doubles the effect of this tax. It makes it even more difficult for them to be casting their stuff. We're kind of going Thalia Tribal here, because we have the other Thalia. She's 3 mana instead of 2. Also with First Strike. She's got 1 extra boost to power and toughness. But instead of taxing non-creature spells, she says, creatures and non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped, which is pretty amazing. The creature thing isn't as big of a deal. It keeps their hasty creatures from attacking as soon as they hit the battlefield. It keeps creatures from blocking when they're summoning sick. So the creature thing is a nice bonus, but what we really care about is the non-basic lands entering tapped. Obviously, if the opponent's playing a bunch of basics, it doesn't really do much. But if they are not playing basics and they're playing a 2 or a 3 color deck, fetch lands entering the battlefield tapped that they can't crack right away is amazing. Even just any non-basic. There's a lot of non-basics in Modern, so having them enter tapped, they can't use them right away. Again, contributing to the overall theme of just taxing their mana sources as much as possible. So, Thalia Tribal. And an interesting card that plays well with our Thalias, since they are our main threats. We have 3 of each. I didn't go the full play set of each because they are legendary, so seeing doubles sometimes sucks. I mean, they're so good that you probably want multiple in your hand, so when one dies, you can replay the other. But if you have 3 Thalia Guardian of Thrabens in your hand, that's not a great thing. You can only have 1 out at a time. So I went 3 of each, but they are our main threat. Because Simian Spirit Guide doesn't really count as a creature. We're using him for mana most of the time, although we could hard cast him. But, a 2/2 for 3 isn't the most efficient threat. Our other creature is Leonin Arbiter. We'll get to him in a minute. But yeah, so again, our main threats are these Thalias, which happen to both be legendary. So we want them to stick around. So we have this cool card called Eiganjo Castle. It's a legendary land, taps for white, comes in untapped, so it basically takes the place of a basic Plains. There's no real downside to running it, except for, non-basic land hate, like Blood Moon or something. Otherwise, it's just an untapped white source. However, we can tap white and it to prevent the next 2 damage that would be dealt to target legendary creature this turn. So this land protects our Thalias, which is pretty great. Jumping back over to the Leonin Arbiter I just mentioned. He's a 2/2 for 2. This is a staple in the Death and Taxes decks, the Hate Bears decks. Players can't search libraries. Any player may pay 2 for that player to ignore this effect. Okay, so this can affect us. We have to be careful and play around fetch lands. He does keep us from searching libraries as well, so we want to get our fetch lands cracked before we play this guy out, so it does affect us as well, but hopefully it's affecting the opponent more. And the classic combo is with a Leonin Arbiter out, all of a sudden a Ghost Quarter becomes a Wasteland, Strip Mine, whatever you want to call it. Sacrifice Ghost Quarter, destroy target land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card. However, if this guy's out, they can't actually do that searching. So Ghost Quarter just blows up the land. So that's a great combo there. And let's see, what am I missing here? Oh yeah, I guess kind of support cards, other interaction. We'll talk about Ajani. Top of our curve, 4 mana, Planeswalker. He also fits the game plan and is pretty powerful. His +1, target permanent doesn't untap during its controller's next untap step. So of course we can target a land, and so that land is useless the next turn. Or we could target a creature, keep it from attacking. Again, has some utility. Creatures or lands or whatever it might be. But it definitely helps towards the mana taxing. His -2 is a Lightning Helix, deals 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. Pretty solid. And the ultimate, if we ever get that off, is just insane. Destroy all lands target player controls. So if we ever ultimate Johnny, we're probably already winning anyway, but that will definitely seal the deal. So I think that's it for the kind of the thematic cards here. We'll talk about the support cards now. Lightning Bolt, we're in red. Lightning Bolt is the best, most versatile card in red, so we are running a full playset. Pretty self-explanatory. Can kill off creatures, can burn their life total. It's great. We're playing Oust in this deck, which you don't see very often. Usually if you're in white, the 1 mana removal spell of choice is, of course, Path to Exile. However, unfortunately, that's counterintuitive to our game plan. You exile target creature at instant speed, however, they get to search their library for a land, which is the exact opposite of what we want them doing. Now, if we had a Leonin Arbiter on the battlefield, Path to Exile would turn into Swords to Plowshares, and they couldn't search for that land. But we don't always have Leonin Arbiter, so we can't take that risk. So instead, we get a 1 mana sorcery, and it puts the target back into its owner's library, second from the top. They gain 3 life. So not nearly as good as Path to Exile, but in our deck, Path just is counterintuitive, so this is the next best thing. I was thinking about maybe playing Chain to the Rocks or something, but other opponents, like Field of Ruin, etc., is so popular these days. If we use Chain to the Rocks and exile their creature, attached to our Mountain or Sacred Foundry, they just Field of Ruin our whatever land it's attached to, and then they get their creature back, and yeah, it's useless there. So I went with Oust instead of Chain to the Rocks. And I think that just about does it. The mana base, we've got 4 Sacred Foundry, 4 Arid Mesa, 1 basic plain, some basic mountains. Ghost Quarter combo with Leonin Arbor I already talked about. Iganjo Castle, Flagstones of Trocaire. The last one we haven't talked about is Gemstone Caverns. It's a one of. So basically, our deck works the best when we're on the play. With Simian Spirit Guide, if we're on the play, we are ideally have the opportunity to Stone Rain turn 2 and really, really mess up the opponent. They play their 1 land, we Stone Rain it. We could power out, whatever turn 2 with. So we get ahead of curve with Simian Spirit Guide. If we're blowing up lands on the play, like boom on the play is insane. So basically, our deck works best on the play. Gemstone Caverns hedges our bets when we're on the draw. So we keep it in the main board, so game 1 we will have it. But in games 2 and 3, if we're on the play, we board it out because we don't really need it. However, on the draw, we keep it in because what this says is if it's in your opening hand and you're on the draw, you're not playing first, you may begin the game with it on the battlefield with a luck counter. You have to exile a card from your hand in order to do that, but you start the game with a land in play. So it kind of offsets the downside of being on the draw if we have this. We now have, we could even, if we have this, we could oh, it's a sorcery. So I guess we can't boom on their turn, but we can mana tithe on their turn, etc. So Gemstone Caverns is insane. We'll board it out when we're on the play, games 2 and 3, but it's great to have in there. And I think that covers it for the main deck. So we'll slide on over, take a look at the sideboard here. We've got 4 Rest in Peace. We don't care about our graveyard at all. So Rest in Peace is a no-brainer. We're in white. We have access to it. It's the best graveyard hate there is. So we're running 4 of those because so many decks these days utilize the graveyard. Whether it's Death Shadow for Gurmag Anglers or the Phoenix decks or even control decks getting value with Snapcaster and Search for Iskanta and Dredge, of course, like the heavy graveyard-based decks, but there are so many decks that utilize, they get value from the graveyard. So Rest in Peace is an amazing sideboard card. Same with Stony Silence. I only have 3 of them, though. With KCI gone, I'm less scared about artifacts. Hardened Scaled Affinity is still an amazing, or a pretty popular, really good deck, and regular Affinity, too. I'm not as scared of them because we have the land destruction. Usually, Hardened Scales, one of their big win cons is they just dump a bunch of counters on an Inkmoth Nexus, and we can just blow up the Inkmoth Nexus. So they're obviously still going to be hard to beat. It's still a tough deck, but I don't see Stony Silence as being a 4 of. So I've got 3 of them. Anger of the Gods for the very aggro creature-based decks. They flood the board and go wide. Obviously, this kills all of our own creatures as well. We have nothing with more than 3 toughness. But we play around it if we have it, of course. It's worth the include. If we are playing a very creature-heavy base deck, we could even take out the Thalias. The 2-power First Strike is powerful against creatures, but it taxes their non-creatures. If they're not playing non-creatures as much, Thalia loses some of her value. So we could board out a couple of her and bring in the Anger of the Gods. Wipe out, 8 wax, spirits, whatever, that sort of thing. Boil, if we're playing a blue deck. Destroy all islands. Pretty self-explanatory. If we can get this off against control, we decimate their mana base. So Boil's just amazing against any blue decks. Against Merfolk. I mean, they're Vile decks, so they could still work without their lands, but stuff like that. Anything that uses islands, this will be pretty good against. And then Dragon's Claw for the burn matchup. Keep our life total high because we're also playing red. So not only are we gaining life every time they cast a spell, but gaining life when we cast our red spells as well. So Dragon's Claw does some work there. And I think that's it. That kind of covers everything. So what's better than land destruction? Who doesn't love land destruction unless you're on the receiving end? So this should be a lot of fun. We're going to give it a go in a friendly modern league and see how we do. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the first match.